Hello students. Today we shall continue our discussion of Aldous Huxley's novel Brave New World. You might remember we have done 2 lessons on this already. 2 more lessons on this novel will be taken up. In the 3rd lesson we are going to begin with chapter 6 because we have completed up to chapter 5. We also discussed earlier what is utopia and what is the need for writing science fiction in the 20th century. Let us start with chapter 6, which is the chapter where Bernard takes permission to visit the Savage Reservation. Earlier, you might remember that we had discussed Bernard and Lenina are planning to go for a holiday to the Savage Reservation. Not everybody can go there. Only an Alpha Plus can get permission. Bernard is an Alpha Plus and he chooses to take Lenina along with her. But Bernard's behavior is sometimes very unusual. He is not like the people of the New World who don't think or who don't rebel. Bernard is a rebel. This we found out in the earlier chapters also. In this chapter, there are 3 different parts of action taking place. One part is where Bernard and Lenina discuss their forthcoming holiday. Lenina insists on freedom and happiness. She says, I have the right to be free and I have the right to be happy. Bernard does not agree with all this. He has different ideas, subversive ideas. So their argument is one part of this chapter. This is chapter 6. The second part is where Bernard goes to take permission from the director of the hatcheries. You might remember that Tomakin is the director of the hatcheries. When Bernard goes there, Tomakin tells him in a very nostalgic mood that he had also gone to the Savage Reservation as a young man and he had taken a Beta Plus called Linda. Unfortunately, Linda expected a child when she was in the reservation. And as we discussed, motherhood is not allowed in the New World. So Tomakin came back without Linda. Of course, he does not say all this to Bernard, but Bernard guesses it. But suddenly, looking at Bernard's attitude, the director gets upset and thinks that this man is to be exiled. He is not behaving in a conformist attitude of the people of the reservation, so he should be exiled. There is also a 3rd part in this chapter, and that is when Lenina and Bernard have taken a rocket and come to the New World, they meet the warden of the reservation. In the New World, they travel from one place to another by what is called as a transatlantic rocket. Because the Savage Reservation is in America. They are going from England to America, transatlantic rocket. So the warden tells them about the reservation. He says that it's a wonderful place and you will enjoy your holiday. Look at the irony here. It is almost as though Huxley is saying that it's like us going to a zoo. Don't we go to see wild animals? He is describing like that. This is where the chapter ends. We move on to the 7th chapter now, which is the actual visit to the reservation. Bernard and Lenina have now come to the reservation. Lenina is a little scared as to what will happen. She makes a terrible mistake, and that is she forgets to bring her ration of soma. Soma is the drug which does not have any after effects. So the people of the New World constantly use soma to escape from unpleasant reality. The Savage Reservation is unpleasant reality. Therefore, her forgetting to bring soma is a terrible mistake. The first thing they see when they come here is a ritual where a young boy of 18 goes round a snake pit and he is constantly beaten by another man with a whip. This is a typical ritual which happens very often in tribal cultures, where you enjoy suffering. You are supposed to be purified by suffering. But Lenina is completely shocked. She becomes hysterical. She cannot bear this sight. Suddenly they meet a blonde, handsome young man whom they think of as the savage. Actually, his name is John. He comes and introduces himself. And his mother also comes. The mother is Linda. Nobody knows now who is John and who is Linda. In the later chapters only we will come to know. But Bernard is surprised, and he is, very keen to know more about John's life. Linda comes, she's old, she's fat, and she's filthy, and hugs Lenina. Lenina feels extremely uncomfortable, and she's desperate to go back to Santa Fe, where in a hotel they have booked rooms. Santa Fe is civilization. The savage reservation is considered to be uncivilized. You can see how Huxley is making a comparison now between civilization, that is the New World, and uncivilized behavior, that is the 20th century world. But the irony is very powerful, because Huxley says a future scientific world will be very dangerous, which will take away your freedom, it will take away your individuality. You won't be human beings anymore. Now we move on to chapter 8. Chapter 8, we find that Bernard asks John to explain how he has lived in this reservation. Who is he and what are his experiences? They take a walk in the reservation, and now John tells about his past. He says 25 years back, his mother came from the New World. Hearing the word mother, Lenina and Bernard get shocked. Mother is a dirty word in the New World. You can't use it. But John keeps saying, he says, my mother doesn't allow me to call her mother because for her it is a taboo. I call my mother Linda. Linda, when she comes here, she brings the morality of the New World. The morality of the New World is promiscuity. So she associates with all the men in the savage reservation, and the women come to beat her up. Linda wanted to teach them sanitation. They don't allow that too. They feel that these things cannot be taught to the people. Then we find that John also describes his childhood. He says how he used to feel very insecure when his mother met all these men. He wanted to get rid of them, but he could not do it. The mother used to often sing to him, but the songs were the songs of the New World. They were not the old songs, the songs of the reservation. Also, the mother would make him read the manifesto of the New World. There is no literature in the New World. There is only the New World manifesto. So John used to read. Suddenly, John found a very old book of Shakespeare. So he read Shakespeare, and now he has become completely conditioned by the plays of Shakespeare. He keeps quoting Shakespeare throughout the novel, starting from now. As I told you earlier, the title Brave New World is also borrowed from one of Shakespeare's plays. Now again, John quotes these words. The words of Miranda are quoted by John here when he sees Bernard and Lenina. So we find that John is very idealistic, and his idealism comes from the literature of Shakespeare. Bernard and Lenina don't know Shakespeare because in the New World, no Shakespeare is read. Now we move to chapter 9. We find that Bernard and Lenina have come back to their hotel rooms. Bernard has a plan in his mind. He thinks that because John and Linda, now he has found out, are related to the director, Tomakin, he will take them and blackmail the director. The director is threatening to exile him. So by taking his wife and son there, he will blackmail the director. But to take them back, he needs the permission. And the permission is not from the director, it is from a higher authority called the World Controller. We met in the first chapter Mustafa Mond, who is the World Controller. So he calls up the World Controller and tells him that to take John back will be a wonderful experiment for the new world. Mustafa gives his permission. On the other side, Lenina comes back and she immediately takes some soma, that is the drug, and she goes on what is called as a soma holiday. That means she loses her consciousness and sleeps very peacefully. John is left behind in the reservation. He gets worried that these people said they will take me to the new world. Is it that they have forgotten? Or is it that they have run away without me? So searching for them, he comes to Santa Fe and he finds that Lenina is sleeping. He has never seen such a beautiful young girl. Remember, I told you that in the Brave New World, a beautiful girl is called pneumatic. Just like we use for our lifts, a pneumatic pump or a pneumatic lift. So the girls are like that because scientific terminology is used. So she is very pneumatic. And John, instead of behaving badly or touching her or doing anything, kneels down and recites Shakespeare. Nobody in the new world will do this, but this is the morality of the old world. Now we move on to the 10th chapter of this novel. The 10th chapter begins exactly like the first chapter in the hatcheries and conditioning center. Here children are decanted from the test tubes and they are conditioned to behave according to their caste or their level of intelligence. We meet two people. One is the director, Tomakin, and the other is his assistant, Henry Foster. We've already met Henry Foster in the first few chapters, you might remember. Tomakin is telling Henry Foster that he's going to take very serious action against Bernard, so he has called a meeting in the fertilizing room. Now look at the setting, the fertilizing room. He says that the fertilizing room is important because this is where babies are manufactured. The second point he says is that all the alpha pluses are in this room. They work in this room. Therefore, he wants to have a meeting in front of the alpha plus. The alpha plus are the most intelligent people in the Brave New World. Bernard comes into this room because it is his trial. But he hides Linda and John in the corridor. He doesn't allow them to come in. And once Linda and John are there, he has a weapon in his hands. He's going to bring them. Tomakin gives a long speech by saying that Bernard is behaving badly. He is not conforming to the rules of the new world. He should be punished. And how he will be punished, now he has to choose. Do you have anything to say? Typically like a court of law, I'm sure you've seen how in the court of law, the culprit is asked, do you have any desire? Bernard takes this opportunity. He says, please give me 1 minute, and calls Linda. As soon as Linda comes in, she rushes and hugs Tomakin. Everybody is shocked. Some of the young people there feel terribly nauseated by this display of emotion. Because in the new world, there are no emotions. Love, loyalty, these things don't exist. You're not supposed to have, any love for a single person. You're supposed to be as promiscuous as possible because that is how society is. No morality as we understand it today. Immediately John comes, kneels down and calls Tomakin father. Now the director is completely unmasked. Out of great shame, he rushes out of the room and we find that Bernard has triumphed. He cannot be exiled now. Now we come to chapter 11. Chapter 11 begins with all the responses to the unmasking of the director. In the previous chapter, the director had resigned. Now everybody is laughing at him by saying, imagine somebody calling the director as father, which is the worst thing that can happen. But more important is John. John has now become so important because we find that everybody is eager to see him. He is like an exhibit, like a curio where everybody wants to see him. And Bernard, we find, has become very popular. For the first time in his life, Bernard has so much popularity because he is the guardian of John. Whoever wants to meet John has to contact Bernard. He feels very pleased. He enjoys himself completely because he was deformed. Nobody wanted him. Now all the women want him, and he takes summer holidays and pleasure holidays all the time. Linda, of course, is of no interest to anybody because she's old and ugly and she's very filthy. So she is left alone. Linda is very happy to be left alone because she wants a summer holiday. She wants a long summer holiday. 25 years she has been deprived. She used to take a drug of the Savage Reservation which had many after effects. Like our drugs. If you take it, you get a hangover and so on. Soma doesn't have any such problem. Therefore, she wants a soma holiday. John objects by saying if you give her so much soma, she will die. The doctor says, don't worry, anyway she is going to die now. She will just live for a few more days. So let her enjoy herself, let her live as she wants. At the end of this chapter, we find that Lenina is given a job by Bernard to take John to the Feelies. Just like we have movies. Movies means moving picture. That is the name. Now these are Feelies, exactly like our movies in those days. In the New World, they had a kind of entertainment called Feely. Feely means what? You feel as though your sensations are also touched by the movie. If there's a flower, you can smell. If somebody is touching somebody, you can feel that touch. It is like that. So Feelies. John doesn't like it. He's uncomfortable. Lenina thinks that after seeing the Feely, he will come home with her and he will try to seduce her. But John doesn't do any such thing. He leaves her and goes home. In her disappointment, Lenina takes a lot of soma. Now we move on to chapter 12, where two things are shown. The action of this chapter has two main things. One is that John is displayed as a curio to everybody. Again and again, John has to show himself to people. So once when Bernard asks him to go for such a gathering, he refuses. He says, no, I'm not going to go. Bernard goes alone and everybody curses him by saying, how did you come alone? We are not interested in you. We are only interested in John. Lenina also comes here to this meeting wanting to meet John because Lenina is attracted to John. John is also attracted to Lenina, but in an old world sense. Lenina thinks that it is because she is here that John hasn't come. She feels a sense of guilt. In the meantime, Bernard, if you remember, had a friend who was the emotional engineer called Helmholtz Watson. John meets Watson and they become very good friends because Watson writes, apart from writing the conditioning scripts, he also writes some experimental verse. He reads it out to John. John enjoys this and he says, would you like to listen to Shakespeare? He reads out Shakespeare. Watson is very disturbed by Shakespeare. He says, these are ideas which are not there in the New World. But then his conditioning is powerful. He's an alpha plus of the New World. So he says, no, Shakespeare is ruled out. I don't want Shakespeare. Now we find also in this chapter the world controller, Mustafa Mond. That is the second action. First action is John's action. The second is Mustafa Mond. We find that he is busy working. What does he do? He controls the world. we are shown how he controls it. He says that a paper has come to me giving a beautiful biological theory. I know that it's a brilliant work, but I cannot allow it to pass. Brilliance is not allowed in the New World, because if you're brilliant, then you are subversive. You can't subvert what is there. So he says, he throws these brilliant papers into the waste bin and says, such things are not allowed. The New World allows stability. It does not allow individuality. Now we move on to chapter 13. Chapter 13 is the confrontation between John and Lenina. As I mentioned earlier, both of them are attracted towards each other. Huxley is using this attraction to show us the morality of these two worlds. The old world morality, as in Shakespeare's drama, expressed by John, and the new world morality expressed by Lenina. So we find that, Lenina talks to her friend Fanny that I would like to have an affair with John. Fanny warns her by saying, monogamy is not permitted in the New World. How can you say you want to have an affair with John? You must have an affair with many people at once, not a single human being. John is eager to declare his love for Lenina. Lenina also wants to take their love forward. So one evening, when John is waiting for his friend Helmholtz Watson, the bell rings and he finds that Lenina comes. He's quite surprised, but he starts, in Shakespearean words, declaring his love. Lenina is confused. He can't understand what he's saying. The idealistic love as we find in Romeo and Juliet, etc., are beautiful love passages in Shakespeare's plays. John recites this. This is juxtaposed by the verses available in the New World, which are verses which are mindless. Lenina understands only one thing, that John is trying to say, I love you. Immediately, she goes aside and she takes off all her clothes, because in the New World, love is only a physical concept. It has nothing else other than the physical aspect. John is shocked. He cannot believe that a person whom he idealizes like Lenina can behave in such a cheap way, cheap within quotes, because this is normal behavior in the New World. It is abnormal in John's world. So what is normal? What is abnormal? Depends on how we look at things. He threatens to beat her. He says, if you don't behave, I will beat you. And this is what he will do at the end of the novel. Lenina, out of great fear, runs away, and John is completely disgusted. Now we come on to the 14th chapter, where we find the death scene of Linda. In the last chapter end, a phone call comes to John, and John rushes off. He's called to the hospital where people are dying, what is called as hospice. The terminally ill person is kept there. John goes there and finds that Linda cannot recognize anybody. She is not conscious at all, but he tries to introduce himself. She mistakes him for one of the men whom she had a relationship with. The name is Pope, but he says, no, I'm your son, I'm John. Hearing the words mother and son, the nurses get very shocked because they have no vocabulary like this. Suddenly, children are brought into the ward where Linda is dying, because this is called death conditioning. Usually in the old world, when somebody dies, we cry, we feel terrible. In the new world, death is supposed to be wonderful. So as soon as a person dies, the children are given chocolates. They feel very happy. So they keep waiting for people to die. Death conditioning. Seeing their callous attitude, John is shocked. He says, get out of my mother's room. The nurses say, if you talk like that, we will send you out. Since John is shouting and, trying to tell Linda, I'm your son, suddenly Linda breathes her last. John feels guilty that maybe I have killed my mother. And out of his frustration, his guilt, his sorrow, and his disgust with the new world, he rushes out of the room into the corridor. I'll give you a little time to ask a couple of questions. But remember, we have one more lesson on this brave new world. Would you like to ask a question?
In this case, when there is a place when people laugh at John, people laugh at Bernard because they curse him, okay? So in this case, laughing is also a sort of exhibition of emotion. So how can how can you expect people to laugh, when they're in a new world? They should be very much rigid and, emotionally very bankrupt and all.
Okay, let me now go back a little and tell you that in the new world, there are only pleasures. Okay, there are no pains. So any emotion which involves pleasure is a legitimate emotion.
Okay, but then what about love? Love also gives a sort of pleasure, no?
It doesn't give, because it gives more pain than pleasure. All literature, love, yes, they are allowed to love, but not a single individual.
Okay.
They are not allowed to be loyal to a single person.
So it's just the physical aspect of love.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, that's a very good question, because emotion which creates, a lot of investment is an emotion which is not allowed.
Okay.
Where you don't have to invest anything in an emotion, it's a wonderful emotion. You can enjoy that emotion which is, permitted. But where it comes to seriousness, where it comes to, rigidity, the term which you used, this is not allowed. Everything is superficial. You can't have anything which is deep. Okay, anybody else would like to ask a question? All right, I think we can end this lesson here. You still have a chance. One more lesson is left on this.